It has already repeatedly been made incidentally plain, however, that the Bible has been everywhere, above everything else, the people's book. This is the significance, for example, of the particular form in which the Latin Bible came into existence. The Latin Bible was, in its origin, nothing so little as a literary performance. It was simply the Greek Bible transfused by the Latin-speaking people into whose hands it came into their own everyday speech for their own familiar use. So redolent of the soil was it that it was a sad stumbling block to the cultured. Ex ungue leonem. The world has never known a book so distinctively a people's book as the Bible has been since its origin. In this sense, Christians have been from the first, above all other people who have lived in the world, the people of a book. The book and the people have been bound so closely together that we hardly know whether it were juster to say that where Christianity has gone, there the Bible has gone, or that where the Bible has gone, there Christianity has gone. In the first age of the Church, preeminently, the Christian and his book were inseparable. The Bible was not so much the book of the Church as the book of the Christian. And from the cradle to the grave, every Christian was expected to keep it in his hand and in his heart, to live in and by it. The writings of the Fathers are crowded with exhortations, both formal and incidental, to diligent Bible reading on the part of all. The reason given is most significant. Those who were taught by others were taught of men. Those who took the Bible for their teacher were taught of God. They were theodidactoi, God-taught, listening immediately to Him speaking His word. Quote, "The deepest and ultimate reason why every Christian should read the Bible," so Harnack expounds the sentiment of the first Christian ages, "lies in this, that, just as everyone should speak to God as often as possible, so also everyone should listen to God as often as possible. Oratio and lectio belong together. So we read in countless passages from the later Fathers, but Cyprian had already said it quite clearly. He wrote to Donatus, 'Be assiduous in both prayer and reading. In the one, you speak to God. In the other, God speaks to you.'" End quote. No doubt it was as possible then as it is now to honor the Bible in appearance rather than in fact. As we may find today great family Bibles encumbering the parlor tables of households little interested in their contents, so we read of sumptuous Bibles then, written in gold letters on purple vellum and glittering with gems, which were kept for show rather than for use. But this very practice among the wealthy is a speaking evidence of the value universally placed upon the book. It was the family book above every other. Husbands and wives read it daily together, and Tertullian knows no stronger argument against mixed marriages than that in their case this cherished pleasure must be foregone. The children were introduced to the Bible from the tenderest age. They learned their letters by picking them out from its pages. They were practiced in putting syllables together on the Bible names, the genealogies in the opening chapters of Matthew and Luke supplying, one would think most unpromising, material for this exercise. They formed their first sentences by combining words into Bible phrases. As they clung about their mothers' necks, we are told, amid the kisses they snatched also the music of the Psalms from their lips. Every little girl of 7 was expected to have already made a beginning of learning the Psalms by heart, and as she grew to maturity, she should lay up progressively in her heart the words of the Book of Solomon, the Gospels, the Apostles, and the Prophets. Little boys, too, traveling through the years, should travel equally through the sacred books. We hear again and again of men who knew the whole Bible by heart. There were, for example, the deacon Valens of Jerusalem, and the blind Egyptian John, of whom Eusebius tells us, quote, "He possessed," says the historian of the latter, "whole books of the Holy Scripture, not on tables of stone, as the divine apostle says, nor on skins of beasts, or on paper which moth and time can devour, but in his heart, so that, as from a rich literary treasure, he could, even as he would, Repeat now passages from the law and the prophets, now from the historical books, now from the Gospels and apostolical epistles." End quote. Memory, however, was not to be solely depended upon. The Bible was not to be studied once for all and then neglected. It must be the Christian man's constant companion through life. It was to be read continually, read day by day and year after year, visited unceasingly as a fresh fountain from which to quaff living water. To this extent, Christians were the people of a book, and to this extent the book was the people's book. There was nothing, however, esoteric in this devotion of the Christians to their Bible. The Bible was not so conceived as the Christians' book that they desired to keep it to themselves. Rather, reading it themselves thus diligently, they wished everyone else to read it too. Finding it the source of life for themselves, they ardently desired that others also should drink at its inexhaustible fountains. The missionary value of the Bible was well understood. Its translation into other languages, Augustine, for example, looks upon as essentially a missionary act. God had given it originally in Greek only as an ad interim provision. The Greek Bible was merely the central reservoir whence it should flow out in translation to all the world. And nothing was closer to the hearts of Christians then than that the heathen among whom they lived should be induced to read the Bible. We are told that, quote, "Trypho is the first Jew, and Celsus the first Greek, whom we know to have read the Gospels." End quote. But this only means that they are the first Jew and the first Greek that we happen to know of who read the Scriptures and remained unconvinced. How many in the meantime had read and believed? As the same writer reminds us, quote, "Aristides, the earliest of the apologists, exhorts his heathen readers, after reading his own work, to take into their hands and to read the Holy Scripture themselves." This appeal to the Holy Scriptures runs through all the apologies, from the earliest to the latest, and shows that their authors were united in the belief that the regular way to become a convinced Christian was to read the Holy Scriptures. In this way, Justin and Tatian and Theophilus expressly say that they themselves became Christians. End quote. And again, for a little later time, quote, "The Church was ever most anxious that the Bible should be open and accessible even to the heathen, for she had again and again learned by experience that the Bible was her best missionary. The conversions of Hilary and Victorinus in Rome were notable examples. These men had been led to the Church by the Holy Scriptures." End quote. We cannot avoid perceiving that in the first age of Christianity the Bible was, and was understood to be, the seed of the Church. We do not, however, half appreciate the significance of the position taken by the Bible from the first as the book of the people until we remind ourselves of some of the difficulties it required to surmount in establishing itself in this position. These first days of the Church were not the days of printing press, with its rapid and cheap multiplication of books. Nor were they the days of universal education. We may well wonder where the Bibles came from to be read by the people, and where the people came from able to read the Bibles. The triumph of the Bible over these difficulties, a triumph which has been repeated until it has become a matter of course, marks the introduction of the Bible into the world as easily the greatest event that has ever occurred in the history of the diffusion of literature, and just as easily the most powerful educative force which has ever entered humanity. We lack materials for tracing in detail the processes by which the requisite supply of Bibles was produced. We can only note with wonder the fact that the miracle was wrought. The publishing trade was highly developed and most efficient, and no doubt it knew how to take advantage of so great a demand. In the 4th century, we see the publishers taking up popular Christian books with the most businesslike avidity, and pushing them with a vigor which the most energetic modern publisher could scarcely surpass. There has even come down to us from the middle of the 4th century a list of a Bible house containing information designed to protect the purchaser from the wiles of too enterprising booksellers. Pious persons gave themselves to the work of copying the Scriptures, and this came to be the chief occupation of ascetics. Good men had Bibles made for them to present to the needy. We are told, for example, of Eusebius's friend Pamphilus, the great Christian bibliophile of his day, that he kept a store of Bibles by him which he gave to those who desired them, and that, quote, not only to men, but also to women whom he saw to be given to reading. End quote. No doubt, especially in the earliest days of the faith, many zealous believers wrote out the Bible, or parts of it, with their own hands, that they might possess copies of their own. Papyrus sheets have come down to us from the early 4th century, painfully traced out in an unpracticed hand, which may be a fragment of such a personally made Bible, though Messrs. Grenfell and Hunt think them rather a schoolboy's exercise, which would give them almost as much significance.